Cliff, I read that you're into blues.
I'm into a lot of different kinds of music. That's
Blues Reds, no.
you know, not real.
He's into yellow, blue,
That's
reds.
not real accurate. You know, I'm into a lot of different stuff. Classical music, punk,
beer.
even, you know, some popular music. It's a bunch of things I like.
And so, looking at Cliff Burton, now he began playing the bass at age 13 after the death of his brother. And his parents quoted Cliff as saying, "I'm going to be the best bassist for my brother." He practiced up to 6 hours per day, even after he joined Metallica. Along with classical and jazz, Burton's other early influences varied from southern rock and country to the blues. And to just what did happen to Cliff Burton on that fateful day when he was taken at such a very young age. Now, it was during the European leg of the Damage Inc. tour in support of Master of Puppets. The band complained that the sleeping cubicles on their tour bus were unsatisfactory and uncomfortable. To decide who received pick of the bunks, Kirk Hammett and Burton drew cards. On the evening of September 26, 1986, Burton won the game with an ace of spades, thereby getting the first choice of bunk. Burton was sleeping shortly before 7 a.m. on September 27 when, according to the driver, the bus skidded off the road and flipped onto the grass. Burton was thrown through the window of the bus, which fell on top of him, resulting in his death. The bus driver said that the crash was caused by the bus hitting a patch of black ice on the road, but James Hetfield, lead singer of Metallica, later stated that he first believed the bus flipped because the driver was drunk. Hetfield also stated that he walked long distances down the road looking for black ice and found none. When a local freelance photographer was asked in a later interview about the likelihood that the black ice caused the accident, he said it was out of the question because the road was dry and no ice was on the road. However, the driver stated under oath that he had slept during the day and was fully rested. His testimony was confirmed by the driver of a second tour bus that was carrying the band's crew and equipment. The driver was determined not at fault for the accident and no charges were brought against him. A very lucky man, I would say there, not to have any charges brought against him. And so now we hear from Lars Ulrich, Metallica's drummer, as he remembers Cliff Burton, and he is asked the question, what did Cliff Burton teach you guys about being musicians and songwriters? And it may be a surprise to some fans to know that Cliff Burton was actually a big fan of classical music. Lars talked about how the palette of the band was expanded from the albums Kill 'Em All to Ride the Lightning, and how a lot of that was Cliff's influence on the band.
You know, so if you take things like, you say like Phone the Bell Tolls, like, you know, that melody, if you take, I don't know, like Fade to Black, you know, that riff, the outro, super melodic kind of, I mean, that was all the stuff that he sort of brought to the table. The intro of Fight Fire, that was more or less his.
Wow.
You know, so there was this whole other thing that came from like the whole classical upbringing that he had. He studied classical music, and he was, you know, could sit there and talk to you about Bach and sit and talk to you about Beethoven and, you know, Tchaikovsky, whatever. But
Lars joked about how himself and James Hetfield weren't quite into that classical stuff at that point in their careers. Of course, later they would do on the S&M album. But how Cliff was already there. He wasn't necessarily a big listener of heavy metal music at all. One band that he really loved and would play all the time was The Police. Lars continued, his whole net was just really wide and unencumbered by how it was supposed to be if you were in a heavy metal band, which obviously James and I hadn't quite graduated to at that time. The question or the theory was then put to Ulrich of how some fans may say only the first 3 or 4 records from Metallica are any good, and if Cliff had have been around, if he had have lived, there would have been no Black Album or no Load. But Lars simply responded to this by saying that he doesn't think in those terms. about the what ifs and what could have beens. Lars continued on this point.
If you take like Enter Sandman, right? So you sit there and it's a great riff and it's a great this and we're doing this kind of, and we tried a lot of different stuff with Newstead and, you know, this and that. And then it was sort of like, okay, you know what? At the end of the day, just thumping
Just
like
Cliff
straight,
Williams. Yeah.
doing the Cliff Williams straight 8 notes, Roger Glover, Smoke on the Water. It just works for the song. So I don't think Cliff would have said, you, I'm not doing that. His thing was just what's best for the song, what's the bigger picture.
Bingo, right.
So quite interesting there, that question being put to Lars on if Cliff hadn't have died, how the band, you know, wouldn't have done the Black Album, wouldn't have done Load and stuff like that. And it is an interesting question to ask, just what direction would have Metallica taken had Cliff Burton not passed away? Would have the Black Album sounded any different with Cliff's influence on there? I mean, of course it would have, but we just can't tell how much, right? Or if they would have just kept it straight hard rock and metal as it is. So it was very tragic how things ended up there for Cliff Burton and Metallica. The band would write a tribute to Burton on the And Justice for All album, the song To Live Is to Die. And so following on from the death of Burton, Metallica has gone on to have 2 further bass players in their stable. First, of course, Jason Newsted, who left the band in 2001 after nearly 15 years with Metallica, and current bass player Robert Trujillo, who has been with the band since 2003. But many say that the material that Metallica released, with Cliff Burton as their bass player for those first 3 studio albums, was some of the best stuff that Metallica ever produced. You be the judge. But the band is still going strong, still produce a really awesome, powerful live show. Hetfield's voice hasn't really left him like it has done other aging rock bands. He still has good, strong vocals, and the band is still really awesome. Releasing their 11th studio album, 72 Seasons, in 2023. So rock on, Metallica. Thanks heaps, guys, for tuning in. As always, be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next time.